Subpart E, denial and revocation of certification. This is the conductor certification final ruling of Title 49 Code of Regulation FRA, conductor certification final ruling. Subpart E, denial and revocation of certification. 241 denial of certification. Railroad shall not notify the candidate certification recertification information to the railroad for the form of the basis of denying the personal certification, provided that the personal responsible opportunity explain the review of the adverse information writing prior to denying certification. A railroad shall provide the conductor candidate with the written documentation records, including written statements related to the failure to meet the requirement of the part supporting the pending denial decision. This section does not require further opportunity to comment on the railroad's denial based on the solely factor addressed in 242.11, 242.11.15, 242.403, and the opportunity comment after 242.109 has been provided. The railroad denies the person certification recertification and shall notice that the person adverse decision explaining in the writing basis of the denial decision. The basis for the railroad's denial decision shall address the examination rebuttal information of the conductor candidate may be approved for the writing and the purpose of the paragraph in section paragraph A in this section. The documentation explains for the basis of this denial should be served on the persons within 10 days after the date railroad's decision shall give the date of the decision. B. The railroad shall not deny any person certification of failing to comply with the railroad operating practices constituting violation under the statute 242.403 E1 through 1. E1 through 11. This part has sufficient evidence establishes intervening causing prevented material impaired the conductor's ability to comply with the railroad operating rules and practices. 242.403 criteria of revocation certification. Each railroad shall adopt and comply with the program meets the requirements of this section with any of the persons, including but not limited to each of the railroad officer, supervisor, employee violates any requirement of the program which complies with the requirement of this section. The person shall be considered to violate the requirements in this section. It shall be unlawful to file and comply with any of the railroad rules practices described in E of this section. C1. Certified conductor has demonstrated the failure to comply with the railroad rules practices described in paragraph E of the section shall have his or her certification revoked. 2. A certified conductor is monitoring, piloting, instructing conductor failures and appropriate actions to prevent a violation. Paragraph of the E. This section has his or her certification revoked. Appropriate action does not mean the supervisor, pilot, or instructor must prevent a violation from occurring at all costs. The duty may be met by warning the conductor of the engineering and appropriate the potential foreseeable violation. 3. A certified conductor who is called in the railroad to perform the duty of the train crew member other than the conductor locomotive engineer shall have his or her certification revoked based on the actions taken by or not taken by performing the duty. The limitations consideration prior operating rule compliance data determining whether the person or the remaining certified conductor railroad shall consider the operating rule compliance during the data including only conduct described in the E1 through E11 of the section occurred with a period of 36 consecutive months prior to the determination or review of existing certification shall be initiated prompt upon the occurrence of the documentation of any conduct described in this section. E. The railroad shall only consider violations of the operating rules and practices involved. 11. 1. Failure to appropriate action to prevent locomotive engineer training the conductor assigned to the failing of the control locomotive training in accordance with the signal indication, excluding hand or radio signal indication switch of the requires complete stop before passing when the conductor is located in the operating gap. Otherwise, knowledge of the signal indication appropriate action does not mean the conductor must prevent the violation of occurring at all. Costs duty that may be met with warning an engineer of the potential foreseeable violation. 2. Failure to take an action to prevent locomotive engineering train conductor is assigned to and from the failing of the following limitations concerning the train speed. 1. Whether the conductor is located on the operation cab, the speed of the train was operated exceeded the maximum authorized limited by at least 10 miles per hour. The restricted speed affects railroad should consider the only violation conditional clause of the restricted speeds clause that requires stopping when 1.5 of the locomotive engineering range vision operational equivalent which caused the reportable incidents under 225 of this chapter, except for the accidents and incidents that are caused by covered data under statute 225F. 225.5 of this chapter. Appropriate action does not mean the conductor must prevent violation occurring at all costs. The duty must be met by warning an engineer of the potential foreseeable violation. 2. When not operating a cab, the conductor is deemed to have taken the appropriate action in compliance with the applicable railroad operating rules and special instructions. Failure to perform acknowledges the required brake test was performed pursuant to Class 1, Class 1A, Class 2, and Class 3 transfer brakes test provisions to Part 232, Chapter Class 1A, and Class 2 running brake test provisions in Chapter 238. Failure to take appropriate action preventing locomotive engineering training conducting assigned with the occupying main track segment of the main track without proper authority permission. Appropriate action does not mean that the conductor must prevent violation occurring at all costs. The duty may be met by the warning engineer potential foreseeable violation. Failure to comply with prohibitions, tampering with the locomotive mounted safety devices, knowingly failing to take appropriate action to preventing locomotive engineering training with the conductor is assigned to fail to comply with the prohibitions against tampering the locomotive mounted safety devices, knowingly fail to the appropriate prevent locomotive engineering. The train conductor is assigned with the operating permitting to operate a train within the unauthorized disabled safety device controlling locomotive. See Title 49 CFR to Part 218 and Subpart D and Appendix C in Part 218 to Part 218. 6. Failure to comply with the provisions of 218.99 of the chapter shoving and pushing the movement of the railroad should only consider the violation of 218.99 of this chapter the reportable accidents incidences under the Part 225 of the chapter, except for the accidents incidences classified in the cover data under 225F of the 225 of this chapter. Failure to comply with the provisions of 218.101 for the chapter, leaving rolling stock on the maintenance of the way equipment is clear. Railroads shall only consider violation of 218.101 of this chapter will cause the reportable accidents incidents under the 225 chapter, except for the accidents incidents that are classified as covered data under 225 5 of this chapter. Failure to comply with the provision of 218.103 of the chapter, hand-out operated switches, including crossover switches, railroads shall only consider with the violation of 218.103 of the chapter will be reported incidents under the paragraph Part 225 of the chapter, except for the incidents classified as covered data of the 225.5 of the chapter. Failure to comply with 218.105 of this chapter, additional operational requirements of the operated maintained switches. Railroads shall only consider the violation of 218.105 of the chapter will cause the reportable accident incidences under 225 of this chapter, except for the incidences that are classified in covered data under 225 of the 5 of the chapter. The failure to comply with the provision of 218.107 of this chapter and the additional operational requirements of hand operators crossover switches. Railroad shall only consider the violation of 218.107 of this chapter which causes the reportable accident incidents under the 225 of the chapter, except for the accidents incidences that are classified as covered data under 225 of this chapter. Failure to comply with the provision of 218.109 of the chapter hand operated fixed derails. The railroad shall only consider the violation of 218.109 of the chapter the reportable accidents incidents under the 225 of the chapter, except for the accidents incidences that are classified in covered data of the 225 of the 5 of the chapter. 12. The failure to comply with the 219.101 of this chapter, however, such incidents is considered a violation of the purpose of 242.405A2 and 3. F1. If any of the incidents of the person contravened more than one of the operating rules or practice of the event shall be treated as a single violation for the purpose of this section. 2. The violation of one or more operating practices described in paragraph E1 through E11 of this section occurs during the properly conducted operating compliance test of the subject of the provision of the chapters counted in the determining period ineligibility procedure described in 242.405. An operational test that is not complied with compliance with the part of the railroad operating rules of the railroad program under 217.9 that this chapter will not be considered legitimate testing. Operational skill knowledge will not be considered certification recertification purposes. 4. Railroads shall not be permitted to deny or revoke employees' certification based upon additional conditions, operating restrictions imposed and pursuant to 242.107D. Periods of ineligibility. A period of ineligibility described in paragraph A shall 1. Begin with the person for the not currently certified on the date of the railroad written determination must recently incident has occurred. 2. Being the person for a person currently certified with the date of the railroad notification the person of the recertification has been denied, certification has been revoked. 3. The being terminated according to the following standards. 1. On other main track where restricted speed operational equivalent therefore is in effect the period of revocation violation of 242.403 403E6 and 8 and not 10 and 11 shall be reduced on the half that's provided in another revocable events that have occurred with the previous 12 months. 2. In the case of signal incident involving a violation of one or more of the operating rules described in the 242.403E1 through E11, the person shall have his or her certificate revoked for the period of 30 calendar days. In the case of two separate incidents involving violation of one or more of the operating rules described in 242.403E1 through E11, they occurred within 24 months of each of the other, and the person shall have his or her certificate revoked period of 6 months. For the case of the three separate incidents involving violation of one or more of the operating rules, procedures described in 242.403E1 and through E12 occurred in 36 months of each other. The person shall have his or her certificate revoked for the period of 1 year. 5. In case of the four separate incidents involving violations of one or more of the operating rules described in 242.403E1 through E12 that occurred in 36 months each other, and the person shall have his or her certificate revoked for a period of 3 years. 6. Based on the occurrence of violations described in 242.403E12, different periods of ineligibility may result in the provision of the section 242.115 of the period of the revocation shall control any all periods of revocation period of the paragraph A of the section may consist of the training, the reduction of the periods of ineligibility. A person who has certification is denied and revoked shall be ineligible for the grant and reinstatement of the certification prior to the expiration initial period of ineligibility off only if the denial of revocation certification in accordance with the provision of paragraph A3 of the section for a period of 1 year or less. The certification is denied revoked for the reason for other than non-compliance with 219.101 of this chapter. The person is evaluated railroad officer determined to have received adequate remedial training. The person successfully completes a mandatory program of the training or training determining necessary for the railroad prior to the returning of the service. At least one half of the written period of the ineligible specified paragraph A3 of the section 242.407 process of a revocation certificate. Except for is provided by 242.115, the railroad a railroad certificate recertifies the conductor during the period of the certificate is valid, acquires the railroad reliable information regarding the violation of 242.403 and 242.115E, and the chapter shall revoke the person's conductor's certification. Depending on the revocation determination under the section, the railroad shall, upon request, reliable information regarding the violation of statute 242.403, 242.115, the chapter immediately suspended the person's certificate. 2. The prior to upon suspending of the person's certificate, but provide notice of requesting of the suspension to prevent revocation opportunity for hearing before a presiding officer other than an investigating officer. Notice of the initial given either orally or written. Even if given orally, it may be confirmed written, and the written confirmation must be made promptly within configuration of the conformance to notification provisions. The applicable collective bargaining agreement shall be deemed to satisfy the written confirmation requirements of the section. In the absence of applicable collective bargaining agreement and provisions with the written confirmation made within 96 hours. 3. Conveying the hearing within the deadline prescribed in either the paragraph of the C1 of the section. The applicable collective bargaining agreement is permitted under paragraph D of the section. No more later than convening hearing and notwithstanding the terms of applicable collective bargaining agreement, the railroad conveying with the hearing shall provide with the person copying the written information listing witnesses railroad with presenting the hearing. If requested reset as to the start of the hearing, will be granted the information not to provide until just prior to the convening of the prior hearing. If within the information provided with the statement, an employee conveying the railroad will make the employee available to the examination during the hearing. It will require the paragraph B of the 3 of the section examination is telephonic and practicable, provided that the witness hearing determine the record of the hearing, and whether the person no longer meets the certification requirements of the part of the STIB or stating an implicit basis for conclusion reached. 6. Appropriate impose of the pertinent period of the revocation provided by the 242.405 and 242.115. Retain the record of the hearing for the 3 years after the date of the decision rendered, except for as provided in paragraphs D, F, I, and J of the section. Hearing required the section conducted in accordance with the following procedures. 1. Hearing should be conveyed within 10 days of the date of the certificate and suspended unless the conductor requests and consent the delay of the start of the hearing. 2. Hearing shall be conducted with the presiding officer who can only be a proficient person but authorized by the railroad other than the investigating officer. 3. Presiding officer will exercise the power necessary to regulate the conduct hearing with the purpose of achieving the prompt and fair determination of all material issues and controversy. The presiding officer shall convey and preside over the hearing. Testimony by witnesses. The hearing shall be recorded in the verbatim. All relevant probative evidence shall be received unless presiding officer determines evidence unduly repetitive or extinctive. Lack of relevancy. The admission would impair the prompt or orderly resolution proceeding. 7. The presiding officer may 1. Adopt any new need procedure for submission of the evidence written in form. 2. Examine witness for the hearing. 3. Convey recess adjournment, otherwise regulate the course of hearing. And 4. Take any other authorized consent with the provision of the part permitted by the law expedited by the hearing aid in the disposition of proceeding. Parties may not appear be heard on the behalf through the designated representatives, but parties may offer relevant evidence, including testimony, and may conduct such examination witnesses as may be required. Full disclosure of relevant facts. 9. The record keeping shall be closed in conclusion being a hearing. The presiding officers are only allowed additional submission information in such instances. The record shall be left open in such time the presiding officer grant for the purpose. No later than 10 days after the close of the record, the railroad official and the investigating officer shall prepare a single written decision. Proceeding of the 11th decision shall contain the finding of the facts as well as the basis, therefore, concerning all the material issues, facts presented in the record, citation to applicable railroad rules and practices. 2. State whether the railroad official for the revocable event of occurred in an applicable period of the revocation and citation of 49 CFR 242-405 periods of revocation. And 3. Be served as an employee representative, if any, of the railroad to retain proof of the service. 12. The railroad shall have burden proof of the conductor's conduct, which not in compliance with the applicable railroad operating rule practices are Part 219 of this chapter. D. At a hearing receipt required the section conducting manner that conforms to the periodically applicable bargaining agreement shall be denied to satisfy the particular procedural requirements in this section. E. The hearing of the required under the section consolidated with the disciplinary other hearing arising from the same facts. But all instances, railroad officials other than the investigating officer shall make the separating findings of revocation under this section. F. A person waiving the right to hear the providing under the section of the waiver shall be made in writing, reflects that the person has understanding of these rights and voluntarily surrenders them. Be signed by the person making the waiver. Railroad shall be relied on certification by another railroad under the provision of statute 242-127 and 242-301 shall revoke the certification if during the period of certification revoked the railroad acquires information convinces the another railroad to revoke certification in accordance with the provision of this section. The requirement to provide a hearing under this section satisfied with any of the single railroad holds additional no additional hearing is required prior to the revocation prior to the railroad arising in the same facts. H. A period of certificate suspension prior to the commencement of the hearing required in the section created by the towards satisfying an applicable revocation of the periods imposed in accordance with the provision 242-405. I. A railroad 1 shall not revoke a person's certification provided by the paragraph A of the section sufficient evidence to establish an intervening cause of prevented materially impaired of the conductor's ability to comply with the railroad opening rule and practices constituting violation of 242-403 E1 through E11, or made a decision not to revoke certification as provided by the paragraph in section sufficient evidence that exists established violation of 242-403 E1 through E11 was minimal in nature and had no direct and potential effect of railway safety. J. On the railroad shall place relevant information on the records maintained in compliance with 242-215 of the Class 1, including National Railroad Passenger Corporation Class 2 and 242-203 Class 3 railroads, if sufficient evidence meeting the criteria paragraph I of this section becomes available. Either 1. The prior railroad action suspend certificate is provided in paragraph B1 of this section. 2. Conveying the hearing is provided in the section provided in this section. K. Provided that the railroad makes the good faith determination after reasonable inquiry with the course of the conduct provided with the paragraph 1 of the section is appropriate with the railroad which is not suspended with the conductor's certification provided with the paragraph B of this section and the violation of the paragraph of the subsection of this section. Subpart F. Dispute and resolution procedures.